New bombshell allegations. Kanye West locked his former assistant in a room in his private jet as he masturbated in front of her. Later, he admitted he sexually assaulted her while she was unconscious. These are just a few of the new shocking claims in a civil filing against the disgraced star. We've got our hands on the court docs and we're breaking down all the allegations page by page. This is Scandal, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Sierra Gillespie. The rapper formerly known as Kanye West, now known as Ye, is also known for controversy. I mean, just this year, he promoted swastika t-shirts in a Super Bowl ad. And later, he called his ex-wife Kim Kardashian a sex trafficker. And now that same term is actually being pointed back at him in court documents, no less. Ye's former assistant, Lauren Pisciotta, first filed civil suit against him last year, but just this week she amended her lawsuit with even more bombshell allegations. So let's start at the top. What all is she alleging? Well, there are 11 counts in all in this civil lawsuit, including hostile work environment, sexual harassment, assault, battery, sexual battery, sex trafficking, failure to prevent harassment, discrimination, and retaliation, gender discrimination, stalking, false imprisonment, promissory estoppel, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. And now is a really good time to remind you that Ye has not been charged criminally. These are all civil allegations, and he has denied them. So all of the allegations we're talking about today come from the lawsuit. So back to that. Pisciotta and her team, they've come out swinging. Here's how they describe the defendant, Kanye West, or Ye. Quote, Ye is a sexual abuser, sexual harasser, online bully, anti Semite, bigot, and misogynist who proudly boasts about being all these things. Although he was once a globally recognized rap artist who catapulted to worldwide fame in the early 2000s to become one of the most prominent and influential figures in the entertainment and fashion industries, in more recent years, Ye has become more notable for spewing hate and bragging about sexual harassment than any of his artistic endeavors. And the lawsuit goes on to state examples like what I talked about at the top of this episode. I mean, the Kim Kardashian sex trafficking allegations, the Super Bowl ad, or even him wearing a KKK outfit. Quote, Ye has unequivocally declared himself as a Nazi, has worn clothing typically identified with the Ku Klux Klan, and has used his platform and power to spread messages of hate. More recently, Ye has boasted about his sexually harassing behavior in the workplace and has proudly admitted that he is both a sexual assaulter, controller, subjugator, and harasser of the women who work for him. Ye also uses his platform and following to harass public and private figures alike and is fully aware his fans will engage in bullying and harassment against his chosen victims. One of these quote unquote chosen victims is the plaintiff, Lauren Pisciotta. She's known mostly for her career as an OnlyFans model and, of course, as Kanye's former assistant. Here's how the lawsuit describes her. Miss Pisciotta is an experienced and successful talent manager, social media influencer, and model who has extensive experience in the music and fashion industry. Pisciotta's work with Kanye West started back in 2021, and she signed on to perform A&R work for his album Donda. Now, he promised her at the time, according to the lawsuit, that this will make her career better. Back to the lawsuit quote, instead of advancing Miss Pisciotta's career in the music industry, Ye destroyed it. Ye subjected Miss Pisciotta to obscene comments about her body, demanded she wear tight-fitting clothing, groped her on a regular basis, forced her to watch Ye perform sexual acts with other women, sent her sexually explicit pictures and demanded she do the same, and repeatedly demanded that she join his sexual encounters, which she refused. On one occasion, Ye attempted to vaginally penetrate Miss Pisciotta with his fingers. On another occasion, he orally raped her without her consent. Both assaults occurred during the course of Miss Pisciotta's employment. And we'll get into the specifics for all of that because, unfortunately, there are some pretty graphic and disturbing allegations that are ahead. But Pisciotta also notes in the start of her lawsuit that she worked with him amidst all of these allegations for about 2 years before she says he wrongfully terminated her. Quote, After multiple failed attempts at coercing Miss Pisciotta to engage in sexual acts with him, including an incident where Ye locked Miss Pisciotta in a bedroom and forced her to watch him masturbate against her will, he abruptly terminated Miss Pisciotta's employment. So she's fired, she says wrongfully. But then Pisciotta says Kanye followed her and continued to attempt to control her life. Quote, even after terminating Miss Pisciotta, Ye continued to subjugate and intimidate her through assault, battery, stalking, and harassment. After he terminated Miss Pisciotta, Ye moved into a unit in her apartment complex, placing her in fear for her safety. On one occasion, Ye forcibly grabs Miss Pisciotta by the throat. When Miss Pisciotta eventually relocated to Florida to escape him, Ye hired a third party to harass Miss Pisciotta by falsely reporting non existent emergencies and incidents, as well as requesting bogus services and deliveries to her residence. That's an overview of what she said everything happened, but let's move on to the specifics and start at the top. Okay, so Pisciotta gets this job with Ye, and she starts off as his assistant. And she has multiple different roles she has to fulfill while she's his assistant. So she has to do things like managing his finances, his schedule, and his appointments. She's his point person of contact. If he has any errands that need to be run, she does those. Everything that he needed at all times, 24/7, is basically what she had to do. And again, she worked with him for 2 years. By the way, she was promoted at one point to his chief of staff during all of this. And at first, she says he seemed cool. He seemed to really like her, saying she had good ideas. They could really work well together. And he seemed to respect her. He wanted her opinion. And he said, okay, Lauren, this is going to help further your career. And she says in the lawsuit, this gave her confidence. She liked her coworker, she liked her employer. But then, according to her, it all changed. She specifically says in the lawsuit he had an iron grasp on her. And here's an example of when something went wrong. Quote, during their stay at the San Francisco hotel where Donda was being created, Ye sexually harassed and assaulted Miss Pisciotta on multiple occasions. On more than one occasion, Ye attempted to kiss Miss Pisciotta on the lips. On each occasion, Miss Pisciotta deflected his advances by moving away and making statements such as, that's not professional, in a lighthearted tone to diffuse the impact of rejecting his advances. On one occasion, Miss Pisciotta was unable to evade Ye's attempt, and he grabbed her and forcefully kissed her on the mouth. Miss Pisciotta immediately pulled away from his grasp. I wanted to start with this because these are some of the newer allegations in this amended complaint that he forcefully kissed her, and there's more. Later, according to the complaint, a new allegation, Ye says, okay, everyone leave, out of the hotel room, everyone leaves. However, later he says, hey, Lauren, come on back. So she's the only one who comes back. Ye then asks her, hey, take a seat on my bed, lay down with me, actually. And she says, no, I'm just going to take a seat. And then, according to the lawsuit, Ye starts talking about having sex with other women and their genitals. Ye then attempted to kiss Miss Pisciotta, who continued to deflect his advances. As Ye lay next to Miss Pisciotta, he asked her questions about her vagina, such as, what's it like? Can I touch it? And I just want to see what it's like. Miss Pisciotta told Ye this behavior was not professional. As Ye spoke to Miss Pisciotta, he stroked his penis over his pants with one hand and forcibly touched her vagina with the other hand. Miss Pisciotta immediately told Ye to stop. Ye soon fell asleep mid-sentence. Miss Pisciotta left the room once Ye fell asleep. So that's a shocking and disturbing allegation, but in the same time frame, yet another incident allegedly occurred. According to the lawsuit, Ye demanded, hey, Lauren, I gotta use your shower. So he does, she allows it, and he comes out with only a towel on. Quote, Ye dropped the towel from his waist to expose his penis, removed Miss Pisciotta from the chair she was sitting in, and pushed Miss Pisciotta onto the bed so that she was pinned against its pillows and headboard. Ye used his body to pin and restrain Miss Pisciotta, restricting her movement and preventing her from leaving the bed. He then thrust his penis repeatedly into Miss Pisciotta's face against her will. As Miss Pisciotta frantically pled for Ye to stop, Ye forced his penis into her mouth. Miss Pisciotta froze in shock and fear, but continued to plead with Ye and beg him to stop. After some time, Ye ended the rape, apologized, and exited Miss Pisciotta's hotel room. According to the lawsuit, Pisciotta said she confronted Ye afterward and said, what was this all about? What were you doing? That was so inappropriate. And she says that Ye apologized. According to the lawsuit, Pisciotta said, okay, I'm satisfied with all of this. I'm going to keep working with him. It was still a lot, but I'm going to push through this. However, more things just kept on happening. Ye's demands were so frequent and extensive that he required Miss Pisciotta to ask for his permission to perform essential daily functions, such as taking a shower and to leave the office, even when she worked until after midnight. And when she was working, according to the lawsuit, she was subjected to things like verbal abuse, racism, sexual abuse. So let's break those all down. First, the verbal abuse. Quote, Ye frequently yelled at Miss Pisciotta to berate and degrade her if he was unsatisfied. Ye seemed to specifically enjoy verbally abusing and degrading Miss Pisciotta in front of other men in an assertion of his dominance and her subjugation. There was also the racism and anti-Semitism on a daily basis, according to the lawsuit. Quote, on multiple occasions, Ye demanded that his assistants and their employees draw swastikas in the workplace. And then, of course, there's the sexual abuse. Ye openly performed sexual acts with women at the Yeezy office and bragged about it to Miss Pisciotta, so that Miss Pisciotta lewd and obscene text messages where he detailed sexual fantasies about her, demanded Miss Pisciotta send him explicit material, including topless and nude photographs, constantly remarked on her body, discussed his sex and porn addictions, and detailed his sexual experiences and fantasies with other women. Ye also showed Miss Pisciotta sexually explicit content he demanded from other employees, including sexual messages, images, and videos. On one occasion, Ye video called Miss Pisciotta while he was engaging in sexual acts with a woman. When Miss Pisciotta saw Ye in person, Ye demanded Miss Pisciotta wear specific articles of clothing, such as tight black leggings that exposed the shape of her body or high heels. Additionally, Ye constantly commented on how small Miss Pisciotta's waist was, how attractive she was, and how he loved the shape of her body. Ye constantly told Miss Pisciotta how he wanted to have sex with her and how he thought about her while he had sex with other women. Pisciotta also alleges in her lawsuit that Ye wanted to lure her into having group sex. So he told her she'd have to come somewhere. Hey, come deliver something for me, meet up with me here, whatever. She would get there and then walk in on group sex, again, according to the allegations in the lawsuit. In separate allegations, she says that Ye offered her as a quote unquote gift to other men to have sex with. And additionally, remember, she's an OnlyFans model. He also went onto her OnlyFans account. Ye obtained access to her OnlyFans content and constantly demanded Miss Pisciotta send him additional videos and photos that she did not post on social media or on her OnlyFans account. Ye also took screenshots of numerous photos Miss Pisciotta posted to her social media accounts and sent them to Miss Pisciotta with comments like, crazy, your waist is so small, and I want to see more. Pisciotta says in the lawsuit that she reluctantly decided to send Ye these photos because she was afraid of being fired or publicly humiliated or both. In August of 2022, the lawsuit alleges that Ye says, okay, Lauren, delete your OnlyFans. I'll give you $1 million in return. She says in the past 7 months, she had received a salary of about $1 million from the OnlyFans. So she thought, okay, great, I'll do that. A fair trade, whatever. She does that, deletes her account, loses her following, but doesn't get paid from Ye. She decides not to start up her page again, though, because she's worried, okay, if I start my page up again, then perhaps he'll start to think, okay, she has her OnlyFans, I'm not going to pay her. It was kind of a vicious circle. Long story short, she says he wouldn't pay. And again, all of these claims are per the lawsuit. But perhaps what might be the most startling about all of this is that according to the lawsuit, Ye admitted that he sexually assaulted Lauren Pisciotta while she was unconscious in or around 2015. So here's what happened. Ye's talking about when he and Pisciotta were, quote, hooking up. And according to the lawsuit, Pisciotta says, I was stunned. I didn't know what he was saying. Back to the lawsuit, quote, Ye then told Miss Pisciotta that in 2015 at a music studio session in Santa Monica, California, Ye sexually assaulted Miss Pisciotta. Miss Pisciotta continued to refute all of Ye's claims that they engaged in a consensual sexual encounter. Ye responded, women love to say they don't remember. Pisciotta says in the lawsuit she recalls having a drink that night. She says she didn't drink very much And then that's it. That's all she remembers. So later, she thought perhaps she had been drugged during this incident. And there's a separate incident too in October 2023. Now, this is on a flight, a private jet from Paris to Los Angeles, when Ye allegedly locked her in a room on the plane. Quote, Ye then retreated to his bed and began to masturbate. Without any means of leaving the locked room, Miss Pisciotta was forced to remain in the room as Ye continued masturbating. When Ye fell asleep, Miss Pisciotta frantically contacted other employees on board to see if anyone was awake so they could open the door from the outside, and cried into her lap as she hoped someone would be awake to let her out. Miss Pisciotta was eventually freed from the room when someone opened the door from the outside. Very startling and disturbing allegation there. She also talks about some of the things where he would cross the line, that Ye would ask about her relationships. He would allegedly say he would masturbate while thinking about her. At work, she says that he would take women into the changing rooms and then brag about having sex with them. But all in all, he ended up firing her. Quote, in late fall of 2023, Ye abruptly terminated Miss Pisciotta's employment. Despite ending the employment relationship, Ye's harassment persisted. On or around November 13th, 2022, Ms. Pisciotta ran into Ye at a concert. When Ms. Pisciotta walked by Ye, he stated, I always knew what I would do to you if I ever saw you again. Ye then reached out with his hand, grabbed Ms. Pisciotta's neck, and squeezed his hand around her throat, restricting her airflow. With his hand still around her neck, Ye pulled Miss Pisciotta's face toward his, inserted his tongue in her ear, and licked her ear repeatedly, causing it to become wet with his saliva. Miss Pisciotta recoiled in horror and quickly walked away. After this, and after Pisciotta is fired, she says that Ye moved into the same apartment complex where she lived. During the time Ye resided in Miss Pisciotta's complex, he frequently walked past her apartment in a conspicuous manner. Additionally, Ye stationed his security team at various points of the complex, preventing Miss Pisciotta from being able to leave her apartment complex without running into Ye's security team or Ye himself. Miss Pisciotta subsequently relocated to Florida as a means of escaping Ye. But according to the lawsuit, she wasn't able to escape. On June 3rd, 2024, she filed the original complaint. Then on June 9th, 2024, she says Ye hired someone to start swatting her, which is making false 911 calls about emergencies. She says she was getting bombarded. The reports were kind of crazy, like she was abusing children or that she had murdered her own mother. According to the lawsuit, she was also threatened. Quote, around this time, Ms. Pisciotta began to receive phone calls from individuals who warned her not to pursue her lawsuit and cautioned her that she would not prevail against Ye. This further amplified her already significant concern for her safety. Since her initial filing, Ye has made a lot of tweets that are somewhat incriminating. Some of them are too graphic to read, the ones that were listed in the lawsuit, but here are a few of them. Quote, I used to F employees in my office. A different one. Life is about using your position to F the baddest B words possible. I need all B words to dress like they're trying to me too me. If a B word don't me too me, she don't know how to get money. I'm a walking me too. I'm a big time perv. If a B word don't let me smash, we not friends. If a CEO don't hug you inappropriately, he's a F word. Some women actually fantasize about getting raped. F her first, ask questions later. Why wear clothes? Save that for when you're older. Sometimes I think, wow, I have a rape allegation. Life is funny like that. There is a lot to unpack in this case, so let's bring on our guest to learn a little bit more. It's criminal defense attorney John Day. Thank you for coming on with us today, John. And I wanted to ask you, what are you thinking about these new allegations? We've already heard some in the past, but these ones are new.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So, this isn't happening in a vacuum. What has happened recently that might overlap with what we're seeing in this Kanye case? It's the Diddy trial, which wrapped up. The Diddy trial had all these allegations of sex trafficking, trafficking for prostitution, a lot of things, even though they're not identical to the allegations in this new second amended complaint. I think one of the points is that there's been this sort of public airing of all this, the charges, the criminal cases, and suddenly there's attention being paid to the idea of sex trafficking, of that sort of sexual abuse that came out in the Diddy trial. And coincidentally or not, suddenly some of these issues wind up in this new complaint. They hadn't been in the initial complaint. There had been allegations of sexual harassment, but this is really graphic, really vivid detail that we hadn't seen previously. And I think we have to ask ourselves, again, not happening in a vacuum. It's following in time the Diddy trial and actually the Weinstein trial too. So what we're seeing is this very public series, this pattern of allegations being made, and these hadn't been made in the first complaint.
I was actually at the Diddy trial. I followed it every single day. And you're right. Immediately when I saw the sex trafficking edition, I thought of Diddy. There's no way that you can't, especially after this highly publicized trial. And so I'm wondering, in your opinion, plaintiff Lauren Pisciotta, did she add it because of the Diddy trial that she thought, okay, other women came forward, saw the verdict, and then thought, okay, I'm going to tell my story too?
It's certainly possible. We don't know. No one's said that publicly, but you can't separate the fact that this did happen subsequent in time to what we saw was weeks and weeks of testimony. And again, that was very vivid, disturbing testimony about victims indicating, talking about sex trafficking and all the abuse that was taking place. And now we're seeing the second complaint alleging things that are somewhat similar. I mean, the stuff that we're seeing in this complaint it's incredibly vivid, it's incredibly disturbing, and you have to raise the question, or at least ask, why wasn't it in the initial filing? Of course, you're allowed to certainly amend things like that, but I think if I were looking at this objectively, I'd say that's some pretty interesting, horrifying stuff. And if it occurred prior to this filing of the second complaint, why didn't we see it before?
I do have to ask one more question about the whole Diddy thing because the way that we saw the verdict come down, obviously it was split and he was convicted on transportation to engage in prostitution. But the two sex trafficking charges that he had, he was found not guilty on. And now all of a sudden we have these Kanye allegations. And I do want to again specify for our viewers, we're talking civil when it's Kanye or Ye, and it was criminal with Diddy and he's now been acquitted. But I don't know. I mean, doesn't that make it hard to prove? We just saw it in the Diddy case. Sex trafficking is hard to prove.
It's hard to prove. And again, you're right. The standard in a civil case, it's preponderance of the evidence. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. Generally, that means it's somewhat easier to prove in a civil trial in front of a jury, for example. But I think you have to ask the question again: why wasn't it in the initial pleading? If it occurred, but is it part of the whole public consciousness of things like sex trafficking? And I think people learned a lot, even though there was an acquittal on those charges for Diddy. I think people who were watching the trial, who were following that, who maybe not had not been familiar with that kind of criminal charge before or watched that process in the justice system, I think people learned a lot about it. I think you have to wonder, well, is this trying to tag team that happened in the Diddy case? Now that people's consciousness is raised, now that people have this education, did her lawyers think we better amend our complaint? And anyone can allege anything in a complaint. You've got to prove it up, of course, if you want to be successful. But it did follow in time this sort of public awareness of those kind of charges.
It's still a question mark to your point. We don't know why she added these allegations now at this time. And again, over and over, it's civil. But let's talk about the allegations that she added, talking about an instance where he allegedly orally raped her, or there was a different instance where he kind of locked her in a plane in a private room in a private jet and was masturbating in front of her. These are pretty serious allegations, I'm just going to say. However, are they tough to prove in a way in that they happened a while ago? We don't have DNA. There's probably no video or photo evidence, things like that.
Yeah, it's going to depend on how they back this up. I mean, is there contemporaneous statements to her friends, to doctors, to therapists, to anyone who can testify that she told me about this at that time? Of course, you in a criminal trial, you always want to say, well, the victims. We want to be able to believe the victims. That's what support. That's what prosecutors will say. That's what victim advocates will say. And so, in a civil case, you have to also establish. You've got to have something to back that up if you want to succeed in front of a jury, even though the standard, of course, is lower than the criminal case. But what were the contemporaneous evidence that she had, if there is any, for example? That would be certainly helpful in proving your case. Were there text messages to friends? Were there diary entries? Were there calls to family members? Was there something that's going to be able to show a jury? At the time this was happening, it was disturbing, and she was reporting it to people. Of course, the Kanye's team has come back. When the first complaint was filed, they fought back pretty hard. They said, "We're going to countersue. She was just doing this to blackmail, to get some money, to extort." They fought back hard. We haven't seen that necessarily in this case, and it's sort of curious that there was not sort of an immediate response as there was in the filing of the first complaint. But their defense immediately after that first complaint was filed was basically she's just after money. She lived this lifestyle. She was a participant. The same kind of thing we saw the defense say in the Diddy trial, and it worked there.
I did wonder about that too, with the Yay team responding initially because she first filed this last year, and then now we haven't heard that much from them. And I wonder if it's the additions that have been made to this new complaint. We talked about those pretty stark sexual assault allegations, but then they also listed a couple of receipts from 2025. Ye is known to be crazy, I'm just going to say, on Twitter or X, whatever you call it. He tweets a lot of things that rub people the wrong way or are racist or anti Semitic. And they have a whole list in this second amended complaint of things that he says. And I'm wondering, could the tweets that he tweeted out or things that he said in interviews be used against him?
Again, is this a coincidence or is this a strategy? We've seen those recent Yay postings that were anti Semitic. And of course, in this second amended complaint, there are allegations of anti Semitic behavior. We also see allegations here of subsequent or after the filing of the first complaint, she's alleging that there was swatting taking place. Where
Mhm.
somebody calls the police and alleges something falsely happening at an address. The police go to that address, and it turns out to be a false call. Someone is trying to harass somebody else. Now, that's what she's alleging in this case happened to her after she filed the complaint.
And if that's the case, the swatting situation, she reports at multiple different times allegations that she had murdered her mother or different situations where police had to go to her home, her residence. I'm wondering, there would be some sort of documentation from police who went there, right? That they could corroborate these allegations.
There would be, and what's curious about that is if there was that documentation, if there was that evidence at the time, why was nothing done at the time? Why was nobody charged if it's going to be able to be traced back? You'd think that something like that, where there's a false police call, especially to someone who is at that point prominently involved in a lawsuit against Ye, why wasn't something done? Why weren't there charges brought? So that's going to be something that they're going to have to prove up. Like, how do they establish that if that's the allegation that it came from him or his people?
There were also allegations kind of in the end of this amended complaint after talking about the swatting that he allegedly threatened her, or people, maybe not Ye specifically, but people from his team had threatened her about coming forward. How would we corroborate that?
Well, it's going to have to be a digital trail or a paper trail or witnesses. But remember, this is one of the issues that came up even in the Diddy trial, since we're talking about these things happening so close in time. There were the thoughts that, well, are people who testified, and now that he really was acquitted of the most serious charges, Diddy, I mean, in the criminal case, are people afraid? Does that raise the level of fear of for people who wind up testifying against these very powerful
Mm.
figures in the entertainment business? And I think this is one of the issues that's raised in the Second Amendment complaint. At least it suggests that the retaliation for her filing her complaint was pretty serious and pretty disturbing.
It's so incredible the parallels that we're seeing between Diddy and Kanye in all of this. And of course, we know that Diddy all started with civil lawsuits and civil allegations, namely Cassie, and then into the many others that followed. And again, here I have to state that Kanye or Ye has not been charged criminally in any way. But I'm wondering, could this pave the way to a criminal investigation against him?
Yeah, good question. Again, remember we saw that with the Weinstein case. We saw that in Diddy, and when you have a civil case that puts the case together, and then law enforcement gets interested. I mean, that was the way that the Diddy trial went. And does that mean that that's going to happen here? We don't know. We don't know the strength of the claims that the civil lawyers have brought in her case. But you have to wonder: is this going to be the first step of a prosecution? Getting back to the allegations, those are certainly things that, if there's enough evidence to back it up, those would be theoretical criminal charges against Ye.
It'll be interesting to see what happens if he responds, if there is any sort of criminal investigation, what's ahead. This is definitely one we're going to continue to follow. John Day, thank you for coming on Scandal with us and breaking down the new amended complaint.
Thanks for having me.
When the first lawsuit came out, Ye denied all the allegations, and a statement from his team to the LA Times at the time reads in part, quote, such behavior is entirely inconsistent with someone who claims to have been sexually harassed or experienced a hostile work environment. It is evident that Ms. Pisciotta leveraged her association with Ye and his company and her proximity to him to seek material gains, clout, and employment through inappropriate means. Her initial attempt at a lawsuit for unlawful termination gained no media traction, leading her to fabricate headlines following threats of blackmail and extortion. And again, that is a statement from the initial filing, 2024. Here we are in 2025. Haven't heard much from Ye or his team yet, so we'll keep our eyes out for any updates there, any more developments. And in the meantime, please subscribe to our Scandal channel. It's Scandalous News on YouTube, where we cover cases just like this one. And you can send messages our way too. Scandal@lawandcrime.com is our email tip line. Thanks for watching Scandal today. I'm your host, Sierra Gillespie, and I'll see you next time.